All right, let's jump straight into this explainer. If you've been walking around with this heavy, just completely unexplainable exhaustion lately, I promise you, you're absolutely not alone. Today, we are unpacking the very real structural reasons behind that burnout, specifically tailored for a unique demographic that so often just gets lost in the cultural shuffle.
So why does it feel like you're constantly falling behind, even when you're literally working all the time? It's a heavy question, right? Look, if you're an elder millennial, an older 90s kid, or just sitting right on that edge of Gen X, we need to validate this for you immediately. Your burnout is not a personal failure. It's not a lack of grit, and it is definitely not a character flaw.
What you're actually dealing with is something psychology researchers call generational shadows. Basically, these are unconscious psychological patterns, but they don't come from inside you. They emerge from the structural conditions of how your specific age cohort grew up. They aren't individual pathologies. Honestly, they're just totally predictable adaptations to the massive environmental pressures you faced growing up. Naming these invisible forces is absolutely crucial. It's the first step to overcoming them. Because, well, you can't fight an enemy you can't see.
Okay, moving right into section 1, the worth trap. We'll be looking at ambition, grief, and the productivity proxy.
Check out this clash. This contrast right here is the foundation of what clinical psychologists call ambition grief. Think back for a second. In the 90s, we were spoon-fed this incredibly expansive, you can be absolutely anything narrative. But the structural reality waiting for us, a brutally constrained labor market, housing costs that just skyrocketed out of nowhere, and a super restrictive career landscape. This isn't just a simple disappointment. It's a specific, chronic kind of loss caused by systemic outcomes. It is not your personal shortcoming. Because of that huge gap, ambition grief kind of sneaks up on you. It's that low-level background dissatisfaction that's just always humming in your brain. It's the reason you can't fully celebrate a promotion because secretly your brain is telling you it still falls way short of what you imagined back in the 1990s. It triggers this sudden, jarring, existential panic about your whole life's direction. But hey, you absolutely do not have to stay stuck in it. The counter strategy for this is actually surprisingly straightforward. You just have to name it, write it down in a journal, say it out loud to a friend you trust, or bring it up in therapy. Psychological research actually proves this. Explicitly putting words to these messy, ambivalent emotions literally breaks their group on your brain. It carves out the cognitive space you desperately need to revise your goals and aspirations. And that brings us to a related shadow. Because we were raised under the intense, high-stakes testing culture of No Child Left Behind, and then shoved straight into a super scarce labor market, our cohort suffers heavily from conditional self-regard. What is that? Well, it's the toxic, unconscious habit of equating your personal value entirely with your measurable output. It shows up as chronic busyness, feeling weirdly guilty on vacation, and fundamentally treating rest like it's some sort of moral failure. To fix this, step 1 is a total reframe of how you see rest. You gotta stop viewing it as avoiding work and start seeing it as performance optimization. Irony alert here, skipping rest actually destroys the sustained high performance you're trying so hard to achieve. To break this guilt cycle, cognitive behavioral science says we need to literally schedule our recovery, just like you would a high-priority work task. Make rest a completely non-negotiable meeting on your calendar. All right, on to section 2, the identity squeeze. We're talking digital limbo and social comparison. So we often suffer from something called institutional limbo identity. It's this chronic sense of isolation. We're just a bit too young to share Gen X's analog references, like, say, recording mixtapes directly off the radio, but we're too old to have had the fully digital, smartphone-native childhood of millennials. We're wedged right in the middle. And honestly, that can create a very real, low-level sense of isolation whenever pop culture draws hard generational lines. But here's the perspective shift you need. You can actively claim this exennial middle child status as a massive asset. You've got the dual codec advantage. You speak both analog and digital fluently. By structurally reframing your bridge position as a genuine edge rather than some weird in-between deficiency, you can totally flip your psychological experience of this whole ambiguity. Now, that dual fluency definitely comes with a trap, and it's called comparative diminishment. Because we are old enough to actually emotionally remember a pre-digital offline life, non-stop digital comparison hits us with an extra layer of loss. We literally think to ourselves, man, I remember when this didn't exist. And because of that memory, endless social media scrolling damages the well-being of our specific cohort much more severely than it does younger generations. So what's the way out?
You have to fiercely curate your digital environment. Studies are super clear on this. Passive consumption, mindless scrolling, is the exact behavior driving all this comparison pain. But active engagement, deliberate curation of your feeds, that acts as your ultimate psychological shield.
Moving on to Section 3, the pressure cooker. Let's look at the caregiving squeeze and nostalgic escapes.
Let's take the birth year 1991 as a prime example. If you were born around then, your parents were likely born in the 50s or 60s. Well, those parents are entering their peak healthcare demand years right at the exact same moment the 1991 cohort is hitting their absolute peak professional commitment and career acceleration.
Gerontologists call this massive demographic collision the sandwich generation pressure. You're stuck simultaneously managing the developmental needs of your own kids while taking on the rapidly increasing care needs of your aging parents. It is an immense, sometimes completely suffocating squeeze for folks entering their mid-30s.
The scary part is most families manage this incredibly reactively, like waiting until an unexpected ER visit literally forces the issue. But you really need to build explicit support structures before the crisis hits. Identify elder care resources early. Sit down and establish transparent family agreements right now, and get a jump on financial planning. Taking a proactive approach like this is going to significantly reduce the burden on you when those inevitable needs escalate.
And look, when that sandwich pressure just gets to be too much, our generation tends to lean hard into our intense love for 1990s culture. Now, don't get me wrong, healthy nostalgia is fantastic. It's a great identity anchor and a fun social bonding tool. But it morphs into a generational shadow when it becomes your main avoidance tactic. If you're using 90s media just to hide from the overwhelming demands of the present day, it's not grounding you anymore. It's just an escape hatch.
So, you really need to monitor your triggers. If you find yourself desperately firing up old video games, blowing into the Nintendo cartridges, or binge-watching 90s sitcoms right after a super stressful event at work or with your parents, pay attention to that pattern. It's basically a blinking dashboard light signaling an underlying overwhelm that needs your actual proactive attention, not just another retro distraction.
Finally, Section 4, reclaiming your narrative. It's time for stepping out of the shadows. As we wrap up this explainer today, I really want you to remember, your exhaustion is a structural reality. It is not a personal flaw. By taking deliberate steps, naming that ambition grief, literally putting rest on your calendar as a performance tool, reframing your middle child identity as a superpower, and setting up proactive care structures before a crisis hits, you can name and tame these invisible forces. You're actively carving out the cognitive space you need to genuinely flourish.
I want to leave you with this final, vital question to chew on. Which generational shadow is secretly directing your life right now? Is it that conditional self-regard? Is it ambition grief? Take a real moment today to think about that. Identify it and call it by its name, because the second you shine a bright light on a shadow, it permanently loses its power over you.